Well, joining us now is the chair of the Republican Party of Wisconsin, Brian Schimming. Thanks so much for joining us here today.
So great to be here.
All right, so I wanted to talk about coming off of that Supreme Court race here. Obviously, it was a situation where the conservative-backed candidate didn't win. That would mean for conservatives or conservative-backed candidates have lost 14 of the last 17 statewide elections. What is happening, you think, in these statewide elections?
Well, as I've said, actually since the start of the century, there's been 11 races that have been less than 30,000 votes that went one way or the other. Scott Walker's won several. What's interesting is we did really well last week. We did not win the governorship or the AG's race, but Ron Johnson got reelected in spite of being the #1 target in the U.S. Senate for the Democrats. We picked up a congressional seat with Derek Van Orden. We picked up 2 assembly seats. We picked up a Senate seat and took a supermajority and won a lot of local seats. So I think this kind of story about, oh, geez, the Republicans are in trouble, we didn't see it, and we didn't see it last November.
Do you feel like there's some changes, though, that need to happen heading into a very important 2024 cycle?
Well, look, the truth of the 24 cycle is that I always tell crowds, Wisconsin's not one of 50 states, we're one of 5. And it's why the Republican National Convention will be in Milwaukee. We're proud to be hosting it here, and I'm expecting we will nominate the next president of the United States in Milwaukee. Here's a number people should remember. For all the talk about Joe Biden, is he going to run again? Only 37% of Democrats nationwide, want Joe Biden to run again. That's trouble for Joe Biden.
I wanted to ask you about some of the trends. One of them is there was a large number in the Supreme Court race of absentee ballots coming in. When it comes to Republicans voting absentee, is that a trend that you would like to see maybe uptick to get more of your supporters out there to the polls?
Absolutely. The answer is yes. When I came on in early December as the new chair of the state party, and one of the things I said, and I was saying it nationally and spoke at the RNC meeting about it, is that we need to get folks to start voting early for 2 reasons. We can't keep going into Election Day 200,000 votes down and expect to make it up in 13 hours. It's just not realistic, right? But also there are a lot of incidental voters out there who don't always vote. Hundreds of thousands of them that are part of coalitions that support Republicans, but they don't vote. We're going to get them to vote next year.
Another trend that we saw was a lot of young people in the Supreme Court race coming out to vote. Do you think the message of the Republican Party of Wisconsin is resonating enough at that youth level?
Yeah, I think it can. Certainly under Scott Walker, where we froze tuition on college campuses for several years. I'm going to be speaking at the State College Republican Convention next weekend. I've worked a lot with college campuses, and so I'm looking forward to upgrading what we do on the college campuses, not only in Madison and a few other places, but on every campus in the state.
Abortion, a huge issue in the Supreme Court race. It was a huge issue last fall in those races as well. As a Republican Party, how do you look at navigating this issue, which has clearly become such an important one in a lot of these elections?
It is an important one to certain segments of voters, certainly, and so there is a lot of public attention paid to it. But Ron Johnson was one of the most pro-life senators that Wisconsin's ever sent to D.C., and he got reelected, as did other Republicans. So I look to the examples in other states, not just Ron, but Governor DeSantis, Governor Youngkin, other statewide Republican leaders who've navigated that issue, and we'll do it here as well.
Speaking of abortion, does the party have any plans to be involved in any of the challenges that are expected to come towards the Supreme Court on that issue?
Yeah, don't know yet where that goes. I'm not sure anybody does. So we'll let the legislative and legal angles on it play out. But right now we don't have current plans.
Speaking of legal challenges, do you have concerns that the maps might change now based off of the change at the Supreme Court level?
Well, unfortunately and unethically, Janet Protasiewicz said publicly and doubled down that she wanted to get a hold of those maps, particularly the congressional and legislative maps, to rewrite them. She admitted that she was going to do it. She ought to recuse on that case if it comes before the court. That's the only ethical thing she can do, considering what she said publicly. But I am not going to be surprised to see 4 liberals on the state Supreme Court try to write Republicans out of their seats in the legislature, and I can assure you that will be a challenge we'll be ready for.
The way the maps are right now, would you consider those fair?
Yeah, I do. Well, it's the state's responsibility. I mean, the thing to remember here is that this whole issue, including led by the governor, to take it to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, who clearly said these maps are generally an issue to be left up to the states. And they rejected a challenge to the maps that the governor wanted, because the governor's maps were wrong. So look, I'm not going to be surprised to see it challenged or end up going to the court one way or the other. I just hope, if the left is going to do that in Wisconsin, that they're fair to the voters of this state, but they've indicated already they don't intend to be.
You mentioned earlier President Biden. That's obviously one of the big races that's going to be in 2024. The other one is going to be, there's a Senate seat. Right. Tammy Baldwin has announced that she is going to run once again for a third term. As the Republican Party, what are you looking at as the challenges to try to present someone that can actually make this a close race? Because in 2018, Tammy Baldwin won by quite a bit.
Sure. Well, you can go ask U.S. Senator Feingold what it is to be a safe U.S. Senator from Wisconsin, because Russ Feingold thought he was, and he got bounced out of office and then got rebounced when he tried to run again and come back 6 years later. So I'm not sure any statewide official is that safe here in Wisconsin. But the truth of the matter is, in the last Marquette poll, Tammy Baldwin was like 37-37, her favorable to unfavorable. So she's not in safe condition. So there are a lot of candidates and people thinking about running, and I think we'll see that play out in the next several months.
Do you have an idea of who might be running?
I have an idea of some potential folks that might be coming and might be running, and I'm sure I'll hear from others as we go along. A little bit early yet, but she's announced for re-election, and that helps us too, because it helps focus attention on the race. So frankly, I'm glad she said she's running.
Have you tried to convince somebody to run? Do you find yourself trying to convince people to run for this seat as opposed to staying wherever they may happen to be, for instance, if it's one of the U.S. congressmen?
Yeah, I don't, I'm not spending my time trying to convince certain people to run. There are quality candidates out there already, so I'm not unhappy about that. I don't know that we have anybody from the congressional delegation, especially now that the Republicans are in control of the House. That maybe makes it a little less interesting to run for the U.S. Senate. But I'm not worried about that right now, in the respect that we want good candidates. There are some people stepping up. There will probably be more, and we'll see how it plays out. But I expect a very vigorous race against Tammy Baldwin, who's been there 12 years, and it's been 12 years too long.
It'll be another interesting year here in the state of Wisconsin coming up in 2024. I want to thank you so much for the time here today, Brian Schimming.
I appreciate the invitation.